Good morning, Teresa.
Hey May, how are you doing?
I'm great. I am so excited to chat with you. I have been fangirling about Teresa and her path at Accenture and the incredible transformation you have brought to Accenture and your partners since we started our collaboration. So I am so excited to finally get the chance to go deep with you.
Yeah, right back at you. Even before our collaboration, I remember meeting, so very excited for this.
Teresa, I would love to start at the beginning. The show's called Humans of AI, and our goal is to really tell the stories of you practitioners who are like right on the bleeding edge of bringing generative AI to the workforce. And of course, you have been in AI for decades. You've been through multiple iterations of the technology. I'd love for the audience to hear about what brought you to AI and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I was brought through data. So my training is within distributed systems within networking. I joined Accenture right out of PhD from Berkeley in 2006, and this is my only job. And
I
it's been
love that.
great. Yeah, it's a milestone for sure. I've been able to reinvent myself every few years. So I started when cloud was coming out, and then with big data. And with big data, coming from Berkeley, Spark and Apache Spark and Spark Streaming, that was a really different type of using analytics and IoT to be able to drive insights real time. And then going into enterprise data, which we know is still a very hard problem, but it's really needed because that's the fuel that we're going to pair to get insights out of for AI. That's been my journey. So every 2 to 3 years, started cloud, big data, IoT, edge, now generative AI.
I love that. From a career perspective, you basically went PhD Accenture. Is that typical? And is it typical of Berkeley PhDs? Because that seems not typical.
Definitely not typical of Berkeley PhDs. I think I had looked at, getting a job that applies my background in networks. And as I was waiting in line at a career fair, I got to meet Accenture. Clearly, I've enjoyed it, right? I've gotten to, as I mentioned, reinvent myself as technology changes year on year. I've always been in an innovation role. So currently, I'm our chief technologist in Cloud First, data and AI. So I get to do as a job thinking about the next generation of capabilities and how it impacts our clients. And our clients cover every business. So that's probably like the biggest playground if you think about it, to get paid to do that for a living. What else could you ask for? And so I didn't know that Accenture, as a Berkeley PhD, did that sort of work. I didn't know that they did research. But if you think about applied research, like how do you take a new technology and apply it to the business, that's exactly what we do for our clients. And that gap, especially between crew research and applied research and then production, that's just gotten so much shorter, that cycle, over the last couple of years. So now with generative AI, we're even using the university hand in hand with what our clients are doing.
Oh, it's so true. It really is a dream job because in this era of generative AI, it really feels like the only ceiling on what can be accomplished is everybody's creativity of what's possible. And I love the idea that the research background that you bring ties you so closely to that research community. And you all have got a partnership with Berkeley now, right? As Accenture.
Yeah, so we sponsor their Data Science Institute, and
Awesome.
we do also sponsor other universities like Stanford and MIT. We've sponsored such universities for decades now, but that was almost more of an earlier stage research, like maybe something our labs would do, which is where I started at Accenture. Now I'm within our data and AI business. This is a business that scales, right? So that is learning from these top tier universities what the vision and the realities of what it means to implement these large language models. And we're learning from them because none of us learned this in school. And
Right.
none of us have been doing this for years.
100%. When you really started to kind of make the case that generative AI should be something that you take to your clients, what was the feedback internally? And, how much did leadership need to start seeing that actually there was pull from clients? And I know you all have been doing this way before ChatGPT. So walk us back to kind of your first days and weeks bringing generative AI to Accenture.
Well, this is probably going to be a similar story to anybody who's working in this space today. It was like a light that was switched. That's that chat GPT moment. We're already paying attention, but it was more like the geeks that understood how groundbreaking it was. It has really been in the last year, that chat GPT moment, where I would say my kids understood how to use it, and then even business executives understood how to use it. And I'm sure everybody like you in this space could tell a very similar story. And since then, we can't give results fast enough. They're like, well, why didn't we already think about all the use cases? And why didn't we already think about how you actually apply this at scale? Like, a lot of us have been saying this for a long time. And I know Ryder has been around even before that moment. And I'm just so happy that the world has paid attention now.
Yeah, 100%. I do feel like we saw it also. The folks who were really reticent, but then started to see their kids talking about it and their kids using it, it was like, wait a minute, there is a here, and I've got to dig in. In terms of your role, the overlap of the transition to cloud and the transition to generative AI, while folks were transforming data infrastructure. I mean, it's three massive platform shifts in one, and you sit at the center of that. How disjointed or not is it when you're having these conversations? Like, does it all become a single conversation, or are we still having cloud and generative AI and data conversations in the enterprise from where you sit?
I think they need to be thought of together.
Mhm.
100%. So use the interest and that tailwind and that interest into generative AI, because when you talk about cloud and data, like it or not, sometimes people do think these are technology discussions. They are both business C-level discussions, or need to be. Cloud as that engine that drives experimentation, innovation, and scale, and then data again as that fuel. How are you going to know anything about your own business, your own products, your people, your processes without your data in shape? And then AI, and I think generative AI as this very powerful tool that complements traditional I think those three are now what we need to think about working on together, because you're not going to have the compute capability to power your AI and to put it into practice. You're not going to have the data again to be able to inform you on your decisions in your business context. And without the AI, you don't have any of the smarts and the insights. So I think thinking about those together, but again, it starts with that leading into this moment of interest that AI is so pivotal. Accenture, we had research that was even a year ago before ChatGPT went mainstream, where we found that over 40% of the Fortune 2000 in their earnings calls, their CEO talked about AI. Our latest earnings call, Accenture, our CEO, Julie Sweet, she talked a lot about AI. I imagine that number is going to be so much greater now that ChatGPT is mainstream.
Yeah, 100%. From a POC perspective, shifting gears a bit, internally at Accenture, you all have tried lots of different things and have incredible use cases in production. We're proud to call you customers as well as partners. You have been working on some cool things as it relates to empowering engineers and code development, as well as some cool behavioral science initiatives. I'd love for us to take those one at a time and dig through, because I think you're doing it at a scale that is really unique in the market right now. Let's start with the developer productivity use cases. Can you talk to us a little bit about, like, where do you think state of the art is in terms of enterprises adopting generative AI for developer productivity? And then I'd love to give the audience some insight as to how you guys are doing this internally.
Let's talk about the ways that we think about adopting generative AI. We simplify it as buy, boost, or build. So buy is buying something like Writer, or in our case in software development, some of these code generation tools. And they're great. I really love them. It's an integrated development environment, an IDE that your developer uses, and it's able to generate snippets of code, generate whole modules of code, create documentation, and even unit test cases. The user doesn't even need to know that there's a large language models behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So those are great. However, if we think about the end-to-end software development lifecycle, how often are you writing code hands on keyboard? It's a big, important part, but there's all these other things you do, right? There's requirements generation, there's user stories, there's debugging, there's root cause analysis, and then there's operating all that code when it's done, right? So a lot of our clients and a lot of the work we do, it does have that really important build part about software engineering, but we have also the end-to-end software development life cycle. And so now we might move into some of that boost capability. So boost, there are some tools that cover some parts of that life cycle, but boost might be taking your entire corpus of enterprise data in that space. Like, it's certainly your code, but it could be your system documentation, it could be some of the service tickets that you're getting, and creating this knowledge corpus that works alongside of a large language model. So now in the industries, you're using something like retrieval augmented generation. In
Yep.
this case, we're creating an ability to add our own context now to these other parts of the life cycle. That's another place that we find a lot of productivity improvements, right? In addition to that coding part. And then finally, build is towards even beginning to take a pre-trained model, something like a star coder or maybe a llama code. There's a lot that are out there, and then thinking about being able to add some of our own unique data to it to be able to build our models. So some of these models that exist, they do really well with things that you might find in open source and modern app development. Java, JavaScript, Python. Part of why we might want to build our own is Accenture, we do that work, but we also do a lot of work in some more legacy type capabilities and enterprise standards. So things like COBOL, Fortran, even Elixir from a 3D modeling. So some of these languages, we believe we actually have quite a good corpus and how we should handle that.
Oh, I love that. When it comes to advising customers in the software development lifecycle, whatever you're allowed to say or can say, where are you feeling the most pull around build, buy, boost, or people not even there yet? They're kind of coming and seeking advice and roadmap type of guidance.
Out of all the enterprise use cases, right, Writer works in a great space for it. I think the software development and technology delivery is another place that has a great space for being able to be a relatively low hanging fruit of being able to apply it. In software development, it's not directly customer facing. You have this whole infrastructure to make sure that you are testing it, it's secure, it's complete, it's enterprise grade. So in a lot of ways, you're dealing with a very technical user group who would understand some of the nuances and things to be wary of with generative AI, right? So it's a really great place for us to test.
Yeah.
And so one is that buy model. You're able to look at some of these tools to add to our code development. I said it's a piece of the life cycle. It's a big piece, right? So definitely do that. And I think many clients are doing that. The second one, the boost, and I think that is the part that when I speak to clients, that's pretty eye opening, right? That, oh, yeah, I can imagine that if I have a ticket to resolve, right? So maybe some of your known issues with known ticket resolution, right? When you have a service ticket, maybe that doesn't use generative AI, that uses normal automation and AI. But when you have a new ticket, like, what's going on? I need something to summarize the condition. I need to summarize a state of my systems to be able to help identify initial ways to resolve this ticket and then to document that. Those are all things that generative AI does really well, right? So it complements some of that traditional automation and AI. And I think that second use case, that boost, we're seeing it's more industry leading.
Yeah, I hear you on that. One thing that you have said has been about incremental versus transformational use cases. And I'm definitely aligned with you that you want to inspire with the transformational and also make quick progress with the incremental. Across the use cases that you have advised on, do you feel like the risk appetite for the transformational has shifted in the enterprise? Where I'm coming from with this question is we're seeing even just in the last quarter, actually a lot more like imposed governance and sort of slowing stuff down as a result of a deeper understanding of the risks. How has that changed, how you approach talking about this to clients, whether in the software development lifecycle domain or otherwise?
I think how you mentioned it is exactly right. Inspire with the transformational, and there's nobody who believes in it more than I think we do. I'm always enamored by one of the examples we talked about in our tech vision last year. Imagine being able to sketch an application on a napkin and then to be able to generate that, that would be amazing. I think there's certain parts that you could generate today, maybe some of the elements of the UI, maybe some of the elements of the requirements and what's there, but we are still quite far from having something that is end to end and production ready, right? So you're inspired by that. And then there's value in the incremental use cases. And that's really important because as we started the conversation, all of this is new, right? And I think that's where we're seeing some of the breaks that are being imposed. People who might have started, let's say, with this retrieval augmented generation, now when it's going to scale this beyond an app or that single use case that one team might be working on to being something that is used across teams, how do you do that? Even your vector database and thinking about the cost towards that. Certainly, we could keep adding data to it, but in other storage systems, we have means to think about hot, cold storage and thinking about optimizing costs for that.
Yep.
What's the same thing, right, in this case? So that whole LLM ops capability, a lot of us, myself included, we're learning about it, experimenting with it, and applying it. So I think we need to build some of that muscle so that we can tackle those big transformative use cases.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the RAG at scale is something that we have addressed via kind of our apps approach and like being able to create multiple ontologies, on
Mhm.
top of the same set of knowledge, but for different use cases. It's definitely state of the art right now thinking about that. Most folks are kind of trying to get a first POC that gathers steam kind of
Yeah.
off the ground. And it's okay if it actually is set up in a way that it's not going to scale. We will figure that out later. The other day, I don't know if you saw it on LinkedIn, the Wall Street Journal article that came out this week around folks losing money at the gross margin level with regard to, Copilot and other similar type of functionality. And the counter on that was like, who cares? Have you all seen the productivity numbers here? You should be willing to pay $30 a day for like the level of real productivity people get. There is a world in which I agree with that, right? And we see the data in terms of productivity. I do think it's going to be not that realistic, to price products that way, of course. Maybe shifting a bit to the skills that companies should invest in because so much of what we are talking about is happening at a speed that I think really scares middle of the road speed technology adopters. And I hear some part of that world, talking about, I'll just wait until the models get so good, I don't even have to do RAG, or, I'll wait until the models are so good, I'm getting GPT-7 for the cost of GPT-2. And I do think that those people completely miss the platform shift. But I'd love to hear from your perspective how you've thought about skilling up your team. Do you have AI engineers? What kind of like ML engineers are on your team? Do you have prompt engineers? Talk to us a little bit about how you, Teresa, have invested in building these internal capabilities in house, because I think that will give folks a really good reflection of idea of what you're advising clients to.
Yeah, we have all of those. And part of why I mentioned working with those universities is to develop training curriculum for almost like a crash course that is
Yeah.
for applications. Going off, I think, on your previous point around productivity, that is one measure. And again, in software engineering, it's an easy measure because we have some of those tools that are measuring productivity, code quality, and things of that such. But we did set up studies about measuring using a behavioral scientist, right? This is someone who's really an expert at behaviors, right? How humans interact with technology, with products, with the environment. And so they might typically be used for something like customer studies or possibly medical studies. In this case, they're setting up the experiments for us within technology because some of the workforce that we believe this is going to impact, some of them might not even use the LLM directly, like the prompts directly, and some of them will learn and pick up the skills and start using that directly. Being able to see how people use that, we've only scratched the surface. A small team of folks have been privy to be able to start applying this capability. I'm sure there's just things that we haven't even experienced. We have a study ongoing, and I'll promise to share that back when we get the results. But it is about using that behavioral scientist. We have a team that is using the code completion tools, some that's using the prompts, and we're just trying to see if they're doing COBOL modernization. How are they using these tools, right? In which ways are they doing that? And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from that. the capabilities that you mentioned, right? So some things we know we need, like the prompt engineering, we know we're going to need that. You talked about ontologies. I think this domain knowledge graph and the ability to model that human knowledge, that is a skill that we just need so many more of than probably did before.
Yeah.
And then things around your data engineers, your data architects, they know a ML ops and a sort of traditional type of many models type of scale, going from that to foundation models, right? So it still is an ML engineer and an architect, but likely they're going to be trained to do and handle these other things. Finally, I would say the domain knowledge, like the expert, and it kind of cuts back to that initial framing, making sure that we have that domain expert to be able to guide us and to even embed their domain knowledge into that knowledge model. In fact, we're using generative AI to try to capture and create as much of that ontology as possible. But that expertise is really what's going to still differentiate us and most of our clients.
Very cool. What is the exact use of behavioral scientists? That's so interesting.
Is to set up those experiments. And so we want to create these small enough user studies so that across the software development lifecycle, we know there's certain tasks and personas of work that needs to be done.
Very
How
cool.
can you create these experiments? So think about a clinical trial. You have an A/B test, you have a control group, and you have another group that is doing something like with, in this case, they're using generative AI. Could I create enough of an experiment that I can now propagate that for a population at large? So
Cool.
there's a science behind that, as you can imagine, that it's not, oh, we just took 40 random Java developers and they tried these tools and they come out and they said they loved it. We've done that, and most developers do love it. So satisfaction is another measure, but having something that now we can propagate across the business, that takes that scientific rigor.
That's so cool. I can't wait for that. I think that's going to be pretty impactful. The study is going to be based on how many developers?
That I don't know. I think it's on the order of 100 plus, but
Amazing. Shifting gears, I think on responsible AI, I think you all, more than lots of folks, have done the internal work. I don't know how much of it you've published or been talking about to your clients, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about your responsible AI checklist and just practically, like how that is worked into your day to day practice of AI internally.
yeah, we've been working on responsible AI since 2016. We had published initial report with the World Economic Forum, and our own CEO, Julie Sweet, has been instrumental in a business roundtable as one of the leaders of many other top business leaders across different industries to look at this topic. We live it as part of Accenture. It's literally embedded in our code of business ethics. It works with how do we work and share data and reuse data across our partners, right? Across our suppliers, across our clients, even. So, what could you actually get? How are you going to use it? How are we going to be really a steward of that data? I think we have a base level of technology quotient, we call TQ literacy across the business, so that everybody understands not just the benefits of AI, but some of these challenges. And so that everybody has that first line of defense, right? You can almost think about a herd sort of protection in terms of knowing where you should think about responsible AI. And for those practitioners, that subset that I mentioned that are doing AI as part of their core job, they have a deeper level of training that we just make sure everybody who's doing that type of work gets that, all the way through commissioning this cutting edge work with these universities, Berkeley, Stanford, MIT, because this is changing all the time. I
But
think on the second half is we do also support a lot of our clients is in being able to stand up the same framework. So there's the sort of vision of the company. A lot of what I described is how do you actually make sure your talent and operating model is supporting that. There's also tools that you can use. Some of our tools is actually tracking all the projects that we have and then revisiting at least annually, are they still within the boundaries of what we believe is responsible?
very cool. When you work on engagements with customers, do you agree on what the checklist is gonna be? My question comes from a place where I think this is gonna happen in the future, where companies basically say, "Look, this is our internal code of conduct on AI. What's yours? And where do we have overlap? Where do we have disagreement? And, where are we okay meeting in the middle on stuff?" Do you all do that now, or
We
what?
do that, and that is exactly one of those things that I mentioned is not just within the code of ethics that you should do this, but
Yeah,
we have both the tooling and what that checklist for us should be when we begin, and how you might have variations based off of industries or maybe geographies as well, because we know that the different regulations around the world are advancing at different paces.
very cool. Are you all operating under the assumption that the EU AI Act becomes law?
Yeah, I think we've been operating under that assumption. We've also been working with NIST and some of shaping those standards and measures. I think taking those metrics and even extending them to even industry specific. So, like Veritas with the Singapore, right, monetary
Mhm.
authority to be able to have not just these are what you should measure, but like this is how you should measure. Like, so this is something that we're very heavily engaged with because we want to be able to be ready, right? To be able to continue doing business and to capture new business into the future and to be able to say that we've done the right thing all along.
Yeah, I love that. We are in the same boat, of course. On the total cost of ownership, I think one of the things that folks are really just starting to understand is beyond inference and compute and processing costs, the total cost of ownership from an organizational perspective of embracing generative AI for a lot of workflows. I think there is a whole set of and buckets upon buckets of cost that I don't think people are really absorbing that go far beyond getting an LLM into a VPC. Do you agree? And if so, walk me through how you think about it and how you help clients think about it.
I do agree. In some ways, even though said all of this about how the tech, we're still figuring some of it out, at least the tech, some basics like get an LLM, figure out some of your IP risks, get some of your data ready for some of the cases that you have, buy an existing tool that has that all integrated for you, right? And evaluate how you want to use it. I think many can figure it out. I think really understanding the true opportunity, both external facing, right? How is your business going to change and thrive with the onset of generative AI? Because every industry is going to be disrupted. And then also internal facing, really seeing about not just the cost but the productivity. I think part of why that study that I described, that is really important to us because we do need to quantify these value cases. I think there's a lot of use cases, those no shortage of, oh, I can imagine it's going to do this and it will make it better, but I think there's very few value cases that say this is what we did and this is what we saved and this is where we can commit to saving year on year. And I think that is where the work isn't just the tech, right? It is the change to the process, it's the change to the people, and certainly also the tech as well.
Yeah. In our work, I think, in healthcare and financial services where like production scale rollout and implementation has resulted in tens of millions of savings or projected savings on an annual basis. Even our largest deployments are 2,000 users. And these are companies that have hundreds of thousands of potential users. I think even the folks who are most advanced are still crawling before they walk, before they run, which I think is okay because we are too, right? As vendors, like we're learning about what makes for a great onboarding experience and for a real habit forming workflow and how to work with governance and security that seems to kind of prop up overnight and want to go through everything again. This is a really fun time, I think, to be a forward thinking entrepreneurial person inside of the enterprise because as you said, you get to think about the reinvention of your own industry, the reinvention of your own business in a highly dynamic environment where a lot of people are very open to experimenting.
I 100% agree. And I love what you've been doing at Writer. It's one of the examples that I love to use to talk about both the impact and even how you're managing your own application, right? I think these are some of the no regret moves.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I appreciate you. I'd love to end on sustainability. I know that's something that has been really important for you personally. And, Julia's talked about it and other executives have talked about it at Accenture. Folks may not know what we're talking about when we talk about sustainability and AI. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that means for you at Accenture? And we just all keep reading about the billions of dollars going to frontier models. I'd love to get your take on like the official Accenture stance, and then your, if you can, your technologist and researcher hat on stance as well.
Accenture's been looking at sustainability as what we call our value 360, both for ourselves and what we believe is essential for our clients. The world is changing. I think anybody who doesn't believe in global warming and these changes in just things like power limits, right? These are facts.
Yep.
And so we all as stewards, right, need to be able to act. And technology is a big both enabler that helps everybody be efficient, but also could be something that does drive that consumption, right? So already with data centers, they were already using quite a lot of the power that is available. And so when we think about even the cloud and the compute pre-generative AI, being able to look at that. So we had a green cloud advisor that helped our clients be able to manage and to make better informed decisions, right? When they deployed a workload or were thinking about modernization
That's
for a
amazing.
workload, could you actually do that with sustainability in mind, in addition to cost and performance? So that's part of that 360. With generative AI, we see these demands. So today they're experimenting. For me, I'm even thinking about building our own LLMs at Accenture. We likely have a number of other customers like that or startups. So there's groups that are starting to think about that themselves. If nothing else, these large providers with the managed models will certainly have bigger and bigger models. This is going to drive more data, more compute. So these GPUs are certainly efficient at doing what they're doing, but we're going to need so many more of them and it's going to take even more power, right? So thinking about that needs to be part of the conversation. Thinking about, are there more sustainable ways? And this is where research could help. It could be thinking about doing and being very efficient in your inferencing, right? Not necessarily in the training.
Yep.
So thinking about, again, cost, everybody thinks about performance, think about hallucinations and trust, needs to think about also sustainability.
I love that so much. We haven't published anything yet on kind of frameworks or things to think about, but I'd love to collaborate on a resource to help folks think about that and places where they can think about green generative AI because this is real. Lightning round, Teresa.
Okay, I'm ready.
What do you wish you knew at the beginning of the generative AI hype cycle that you know now?
I wish I just had more time, but I wish that I knew the hype cycle was coming because I certainly would have done a lot more work because, we believed in this, I think, all along, but just I wish that I knew how quickly it would happen.
Love that. A role that you think will exist in 5 years that doesn't exist today.
I guess the chief ontologist or the domain knowledge
Ooh.
expert.
I love that. Generative AI, a bigger topic of the world's conversation in a year, or will it have died down a bit?
I think it's going to remain big. I think we just captured attention, but all the impact that our study, for one, and your study, like, I think we've just seen the promise.
Yeah, I love that. What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for this conversation, Teresa. So inspiring, and I'm excited for our joint audience to take a listen and learn more about what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.